Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We are going to get started here in about 8 minutes, but before we do, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items with those of you that have joined us in the room. For those of you that we do have in the room so far, the first thing I would like to make mention of is our chat pod, which is located on the left-hand side of your screen marked chat. This chat pod will be the best way to communicate with us should you have any questions regarding today's material. All questions pertaining to the material will be retained until the Q&A session that will be held at the very end of today's webinar. So please feel free at any time of today's discussion to go ahead and type in your questions there in the chat pod, and we will pull them out and hold them for you, and then we will get them asked of our presenter at the very end. This chat pod is also the best way to communicate with us should you experience any technical issues. If you do have any technical issues, please make sure to let us know there in the chat pod, and either myself or one of our customer service representatives will make sure to get you taken care of. All of your audio for today's webinar is going to be streaming through your computer speakers. So if at any point of today's event you lose either your live audio or your live video feed, the first thing we would like to recommend is to simply refresh your web browser and then hit the play button again on your live feed window. This should refresh both your audio and your visual of today's webinar. If for some reason that does not work or you experience any other issues, please make sure to let us know either in the chat, or we also have our toll-free number and our email address that are located directly above the live feed window. Also for today's event, the best web browsers you can utilize are either Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox. So please, if you do have the ability to use one of those, that will give you the best user experience possible. We do have a few minutes before we get started with today's event, so we always like to find out a little bit more about our audience before we do get started. If you could let us know in the chat pod where you are joining us from today for today's webinar, that'll give us some very valuable feedback about our audience and just the kind of reach we were able to obtain with today's webinar. We've got about 6 minutes before we get started. I'm going to mute my line back for a couple of minutes. I will come on one more time to go through housekeeping with the users that come in over the next few minutes, and then we will plan on getting started at the top of the hour. Thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We are going to get started here in about 2 minutes, but before we do, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items with those of you that have come into the room. For those of you that we do have in the room, the first thing I would like to make mention of is our chat pod, which is located on the left-hand side of your screen marked chat. This chat pod will be the best way to communicate with us should you have any questions regarding today's material. All questions pertaining to the material will be retained until the Q&A session that will be held at the very end of today's presentation. So please feel free at any time of today's discussion to go ahead and type in your questions there in the chat pod, and we will pull them out and hold them for you and then get them asked of our subject matter expert at the very end. This chat pod is also the best way to communicate with us should you experience any technical issues. If you do have any technical issues, please make sure to let us know there in the chat pod, and either myself or one of our customer service representatives will make sure to get you taken care of. All of your audio for today's webinar is going to be streaming through your computer speakers. So if at any point of today's live event you happen to lose your live audio or your live video feed, the first thing we would like for you to do to troubleshoot is simply refresh your web browser and then hit the play button again in the middle of your live feed window. This should refresh both your live audio and video feed for today's webinar. If for some reason that does not work or you experience any other issues, you can either again let us know in the chat pod, or we also have our toll-free number as well as our email address that are located directly above the live feed window. For today's event, we always recommend that you utilize either Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox as your web browser, as this will give you the best user experience possible. Also, below our live feed, we do have a closed captions window that will be running out through the entirety of today's event. So if you would like to follow along the closed captions there, please feel free to do so. It is the top of the hour, so we're going to get started here momentarily, but before we do like to find out a little bit more about our audience and who is joining us today. So if you could take a few moments, as some of our other participants already have, and put in your the place where you are watching today's event, as well as your organization. That'll give us some great feedback about our audience and who is attending today. It is the top of the hour, so I'm going to mute my line back. I'll shift some things around, and then we will get started here momentarily. Thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Josh Vickers, and I'm with RTI International's Forensic Technology Center of Excellence. Our webinar today is entitled Providing Forensic Healthcare and Support to Native Communities. Our subject matter expert for today is Miss Erica Gourneau. She's an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians in Belcourt, North Dakota. She received a Bachelor's of Science degree in nursing from the University of North Dakota in 2007. Ms. Gourneau has practiced in a clinical setting as a sexual assault nurse examiner while working in various roles within the Indian Health Service, IHS, prior to accepting the position of National Forensic Nurse Coordinator. She now serves as a forensic healthcare subject matter expert for various agency projects, offers technical assistance to IHS and tribal forensic healthcare programs related to clinical training and clinical policy development, and partners with other federal agencies to inform forensic healthcare policy. Just our quick disclaimer, the opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Any products and manufacturers discussed are presented for informational purposes only and do not constitute product approval or endorsement by the U.S. Department of Justice. And now, without any further ado, I would like to hand the platform and microphone over to our subject matter expert and presenter, Ms. Erica Gourneau. Erica?
Hi, thank you for this opportunity to present today. Well, I guess you already introduced me. And my perspective is as a sexual assault nurse examiner. I worked in the system I was a sexual assault nurse examiner for about 10 years before coming to this role. And I am also an enrolled member and teleworking out of Belcourt, North Dakota. Um, Grew up in Minneapolis, so that's also a little bit of my background. So you can kind of know a little bit about my perspective. I will share my screen now to get to my presentation. Sorry. Oops. So as I said, I'm Erica. I am a CNA and also trained in the pediatric sexual assault exams, sexual abuse exams. We'll be testing in April here at this testing window. So I don't know if any of our audience is also going through that right now, but so hopefully soon I will add SANE-P to my credentials. In our presentation, I'm just going to go over, sometimes it's hard to know exactly the level of knowledge of the audience because it's, this is a national platform. So I'm going to come from the perspective that the audience members may not know a lot about the tribal system within our nation. And so I'm going to go over maybe some things that might be basic to some of you. But it's really important to know some of those things, especially when we're talking about jurisdiction and the differences in healthcare systems and resources available to patients. So I'll give a national snapshot of the Indian country. We will shortly, briefly discuss historical trauma, and I'll give you some other resources to delve a little bit deeper into that. And then we'll kind of go over the creation of healthcare services for American Indian, Alaska Native populations as it's developed in our country, and overview of a few laws affecting forensic healthcare on tribal lands, knowing that there's many obvious laws, but I just wanted to highlight a few of them that forensic examiners should be aware of and advocates. Barriers to forensic healthcare access for patients that I've interacted. I'll just share some of my experiences and experiences of their forensic examiners working in the Indian Health Service or tribal systems. And then also provide you with resources available for professionals and patients as well. So as we begin, I just wanted to, give an overview. So this map is a map of the federal lands. And, obviously this has changed drastically, from the creation or the start of our nation to what it is today. But these lands in purple are the federal American Indian reservations. And then it's kind of hard to see because they're very small. There are state recognized American Indian reservations as well. So those are, there's a few here and there. But I just want to, give a slight overview of these lands because not everybody knows, if reservations exist in their state or where they are. Right now, there's about, at our last census, there was about 2.4 million American Indian and Alaska Natives in our country. Pre-Columbian contact, there are about 54 million. It's estimated about 54 million Native Americans and Alaska Natives existed in our country. Many tribes, whole tribes were wiped out, of course, by disease, famine, different things that happened, historically in our country, wars. So, that's very significant. And when we start talking about historical trauma, that's one of the things that we kind of have to think about how drastically things have changed for this population. Right now, there's 573 plus federally recognized tribes. And, this changes, of course. We just had several tribes in the Northeast recognized so this number changes, and I think there's even a couple more that are on slate to be recognized federally. So over the years, this changes. Over half of tribes are located actually in Alaska. So there is 260 or more tribes and villages in Alaska. So when we think of like how many, you're saying, wow, all these 573 tribes, over half of those different separate tribes are in the state of Alaska. So that's a high service area for the Indian health or for our forensic healthcare programs. When we talk about outreach, that's always a significant part of what we consider, and especially because of their barriers to accessing forensic healthcare. And those barriers can be the same, even in rural parts of our country. When we think about that, some places in Arizona or Montana, can be just as isolated. There's also a state recognized Indian tribes that haven't reached the federal recognition level. So there's about 100 additional state recognized tribes. And and then there are several tribes still in the application process of either being state or federally recognized. So when we think of that, we just to have that in the back of your mind that some tribes may not have land, and some tribes may have land allotments and healthcare facilities to go to, and some tribes may not. They may have like a central office, like an enrollment office, but no other really structure based on land that they're associated with for their actual tribe in their state. Others have state land that, it's very uncommon, but there are these state lands that are recognized throughout our nation as well. So, and that kind of starts to matter in jurisdiction, of course, whether it's federal land that a crime happened on or state, jurisdiction. So that's why I wanted to point that out. Another very significant statistic and reality is that 70% of American Indian and Alaska Natives live in urban locations and off the reservation. So the vast majority, we all often think of when American Indians and Alaska Natives, they live in tribal villages or on reservation land. That's not actually true. Most live on state land in urban or off reservation locations. So, of course, crimes committed will probably go for them with the state jurisdiction, just like it would with any other population. And of course, we just want to, be cognizant of where the crime happened, because there are different jurisdictional issues and partnerships depending on where the crime occurred. So the creation of healthcare services for American Indian, Alaska, and Native populations, I just really wanted to go back to kind of the basics of how the healthcare system was created for American Indian, Alaska Natives, because it seems to be misunderstood by people who are not familiar with the history of our agency. The Indian Health Service it's an agency under the Department of Health and Human Services, and it's responsible for providing federal health services to American Indians and Alaska Natives. So the healthcare relationship was established in the first one in 1787, and it's because of our Constitution. They have given different provisions to this, and it's been expanded by different, obviously, many treaties among all the nations, the tribal nations, and then Supreme Court decisions and executive orders has also expanded that. One thing to note, in the in our agency, the Indian Health Service was created in 1950, in the 1950s. Prior to that, there was this healthcare service, but it was under the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And prior to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, it was actually under the War Department. So you can even see the history of our healthcare and provisions to American Indians and Alaska Natives, and some of the really changing direction of our country, and how even with historical trauma, it was under the War Department before, because that it was a provision of treaties. There's a lot of legal basis for federal services to American Indian and Alaska Natives that should be acknowledged or understood, because sometimes I hear from patients that they feel discriminated against or misunderstood when they go outside of the system, and that's because of like the payment of healthcare and how their eligibility to access other healthcare outside of if they don't have private insurance. So I just wanted to, reiterate that there are all of these laws, treaties that have provided some portions of healthcare to American Indian, Alaska Natives, but there's a lot of provisions to that giving of that free healthcare. And to understand that maze is sometimes confusing, but I hope to clarify some of the points that need to be understood about healthcare access for American Indian Alaska Natives. So I think a point to make is I was in a presentation and the presenter said, how many of us have treaty rights? And half, the Indians in the room or natives in the room would raise their hand, and the other half didn't. The non-native participants didn't. And he said, actually, we all have treaty rights. And that is something that really stuck to me. So, natives have treaty rights through, they gave something up in order to get what they, the things that were agreed to on the treaty. And the other half of people, they get to use something, and which is all the land, for what was promised on the treaty. So that's really important to remember when we look at the healthcare services that are afforded to American Indians and Alaska Natives. It was agreed to in a treaty, and we both benefited from that treaty. So, and these are just some of the, many laws that have affected those services and what types of services are available. And then we'll talk, later in the presentation about specific laws that affected health, forensic health care. But really, I guess, all of these have. So the creation of the healthcare services for American Indian populations, I kind of alluded to the transfer of the healthcare services, from the War Department to the BIA, now to the Indian Health Services, which is now located under the Department of Health and Human Services. There is, through different federal laws, so there is what we call the ITU system. And that I stands for Indian Health Service, and then the T stands for Tribal Administered Health Services, and the U is Urban Indian Organizations. So the Indian Health Service is facilities around the nation that are administered all of the health care, like paying of the employees, everything is administered by the federal government under the Indian Health Service. So they operate the facilities, they pay the staff, they are the providers of treatment. And then this website, and we'll check this website out a little bit later. It's www.ihs.gov. If you go to that website, /locations, you can actually find all the locations of Indian Health Service facilities, as well as tribally administered services and the urban Indian organizations. So tribally administered health services, and I'll kind of expound upon why this matters when we're talking about resources. So tribally administered health services are not directly run by Indian Health Service. So although the money comes from the portion of money that Congress gives for health services for American Indian, Alaska Native patients, these tribes have elected to take their portion of money, the portion of money that the federal government would have spent on facilities, staff, services, and they took that money into their own, tribal accounts, and then they determine how they're going to administer or serve their population. So tribes can take their chunk of money and run their own facilities, pay their own staff, offer the types of services that they want to offer. They can also allow. So the Indian Health Service, we can only serve American Indian, Alaska Natives, and we have to. Some of our provisions are that we, in those federally operated facilities, we don't. You just have to be enrolled or a descendant of a tribe to get services at that facility. So tribal administered health services, they can expand that. So they might serve a whole community that aren't enrolled or have no connection to tribal systems. And they also might say that they, in order to come to our clinic, you have to be an enrolled tribal member of our tribe as well. So it goes both ways. Some of them have expanded services, and some of them have actually limited their services only to their tribe. And that's important to know what kind of facility your patient might, is closest to your patient to know if they are eligible to receive services there or not. Urban Indian organizations there's about 41 nonprofit programs nationwide, and they are operating in, usually big cities of several states. Not all states have them, and not all cities have them. Obviously, there's only 41 of them, and they actually range in services. So there's some urban Indian organizations that only provide like advocacy and outreach and referral services. And there's all the way up to, really robust programs that give like direct health care, referral services, vision, dental, mental health services, and like wellness programs. So it really varies on what types of services are available within those urban Indian organizations. So once you start looking, on this IHS locations or IHS.gov location site, it's important to know that you actually probably have to contact that organization or become familiar with that organization to really know what types of services are available there. So within the Indian Health Service, and I'm talking about the I of the ITU system, that's the federally administered facilities, we actually have 12 service areas. Biscayne and this eastern half, there's not as many facilities in the Nashville area. So the Nashville area covers the whole East Coast of our nation. Bemidji is Minnesota, Michigan. All the areas are depicted here. Alaska and California are its own service unit areas. And then the Navajo Nation, or Navajo area, actually spans over a couple of state borders, and as well as Tucson. Let me see here. So, and then those sites can also be, and then if you go to the IHS.gov site, then it will you can go to each one of these areas and find out like who the staff is to reach out to those area offices. So they each have an area office and then are broken down by facilities, and it will list out the facilities in each area if you're trying to find a location that is federally administered for your patient. In California and Alaska, there are not, in Alaska, there are no federally administered facilities. They are all tribal. But they have very robust services there, but they are all under the tribal systems, and even some are located in some of the offshore islands. In California, most of them are tribal. They do have 2 federal facilities that are not, full clinic services, but they are alcohol and drug treatment centers. I'm sorry, there's one located right now, and the second one is being built. So those are mostly tribal sites, and then the rest of the areas, and then I believe Tucson is also all tribal now. But the rest of the areas are a smattering of, federal facilities, tribal facilities, and then there are, urbans scattered throughout the country. I just wanted to give you an example. So in the Nashville area, there's these 5 urbans, and in Baltimore, there's actually 2. And then they also have a clinic in Boston, actually has 2. And then New York has 2. I believe they're in different areas of the state, but so there are some different resources that you can refer patients to, even if you are far from, a federal tribal lands. There may be some services available. This next section, I just wanted to transition a little bit into talking about historical trauma. And this whole issue, or this whole subject, is something that obviously we can't get in depth with this presentation. But I just really wanted to mention it here. So, what is historical trauma? It's a cumulative, multi-generational, collective experience of emotional and psychological injury in communities and descendants. The effects of historical trauma among Native Americans include changes in the traditional ways of child rearing, family structure, and relationships. This is so important to acknowledge and to understand when we're thinking about why, forensic healthcare. It's very relevant. It took me, even as a Native person, learning about historical trauma was very helpful to me. As a SANE nurse, it was actually something that is healing to me, to just know that this is kind of gave me a reason why things have happened, because I really didn't understand a lot of the historical trauma. Even in, all of our tribes are so different, of what our tribes experienced in the past, and then how that had effect on all of us and our relationships today. But once I learned more about it, I can see the significant daily impact of that. So it's really important to understand historical trauma and to probably take some more courses in it. I just wanted to quickly show you a video that kind of illustrates historical trauma in some Native youth. And it's an 8-minute video, but we'll probably look at maybe 5 minutes of it. Because it does a lot better job than I could just talking about it. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up, and hopefully you can all hear this.
I I am Samantha Fairbanks. I am from Bemidji, Minnesota. I am an enrolled member at the Leech Lake Reservation.
Uju, Wasayana Kwaduk, Indigenous Cause, Nudane Benes, Inan, and Danis. And what I said was, hello, my name is Wasayana Kwaduk, which is my Indian name. It means the bright white clouds before the thunderstorm.
My name is Vincent Graves. I'm from Red Lake, Minnesota. I'm in my third year at Bemidji State.
I think growing up as a Native American, I guess you could say that it was a little bit different. Like, I never really noticed that we were poor until, like, I started school. And, like, you know, having, like, hand-me-downs or else, like, pants that were, like, too short for you. That was us. So I guess you can say that we were, like, impoverished, which is actually common in Native American families.
It was different, like, growing up. Like, it was just things that we as a family did. I didn't realize that like other people didn't do it, or I didn't think that everybody did it. It was just something that me and my family did.
Because I was brought up differently than most people, I had no idea you could buy beef. To me, I thought everybody hunted and fished. I thought everybody went into the woods to get their food. I knew there was grocery stores, but as far as meat went, I mean, I've been processing my own since, and at least helping my dad on his since I was about 9 years old.
I think that we were more assimilated, I guess, my family growing up. We didn't really necessarily practice any, like, Native American traditions or, like, anything about the culture. We didn't do that stuff. It wasn't, I don't know, it just, like, wasn't part of our family.
I guess going to sweats and being ceremonial and that kind of things, like, it's not nothing that I'm, like, super into, or, like, it's just not a part of my lifestyle. Like, where I'm at in life, this is, like, just going to school, raising my kids. This is what I need to do.
I hunted and fished, but I didn't rice when I was young, and I didn't start dancing, going to powwows until I was a little bit older, and then even then I didn't start experiencing ceremonies until I was even a lot older than that. You know, there are people who their entire family who's done nothing but rice, but they don't hunt. You know, it's different from family to family. Everybody's been affected by the trauma of colonization differently.
Native American culture has been diminished, like, through centuries, and so, like, it's not really there anymore. It's more of the dominant culture that you can see, like, inside of everybody. To get, like, Native American culture, you have to go out and find it, versus, like, you know, being able to go talk to your neighbor about something. Or else, like, there's, like, the boarding school era, which completely assimilated Native American children into the dominant culture. Inside these boarding schools, you couldn't speak your native language and you couldn't practice your Native American culture. And I view that as, like, the, like, biggest downfall of, like, the culture was kind of, like, the boarding school era, and how, like, the government, like, took the children out of their homes and put them inside of these schools, like, far away from the reservation. Like, these children grew up not knowing anything about their culture or their language.
And just the trauma of being ripped from, you know, your parents' arms or your grandparents' arms, you know, that people, like, not only in Red Lake, but other reservations and other Native communities, you know, alcoholism is something that is relevant, you know. It's something that is dealt with, and largely is because the pain and the trauma that was inflicted with these adults and their youth at these schools.
Like, because a lot of the things were lost. Like, when Sam was talking about the boarding schools and assimilation, like, a lot of the things were lost, and a lot of the historical trauma is, like, still affecting people today. And I think a lot of Native Americans in general are in, like, a survivor victim stage, where it's like we're just kind of picking up the pieces and trying to move on now. Like, we're just holding on to what we have, and a lot of people are still struggling. I mean, sometimes it's more important that you survive through the day, the week, the year, than to try to carry on everything else.
We are not taught our history. Our history is only taught from arrival of contact on. Beyond that, we don't have a history. They don't talk about it. And even then, they only talk about certain things. I basically remember, the way I talk about it, I was like, yeah, I remember that chapter in history in 3rd grade. I feel like that's all the history on natives that we got.
So I'm just going to come back to our presentation. I thought that was a really good a short kind of introduction into how historical trauma has affected people today, and maybe some of your patients. The boarding school era, is something that has affected all tribes, and it's something that is a common experience in, like my parents. So I'm 40. My parents are in their 60s, and then my grandparents who are in their 80s, that their generations had to deal with and may have lost their language, their familial relationships. You have to remember that some children left their homes at a very young age of 5 or 6 and didn't come home for maybe a handful of times, or maybe not at all until they graduated. So when we talk about that, the significance of that has to be understood, and what that did to different cultures and familial relationships, and then also the relocation off of away from tribal lands. There's programs in the past that actually relocated families, and then of course joining the military, which is a very common experience in this population. Joining the military and then staying wherever after your military career ended, has led to the relocation, and then just leaving to find jobs and employment. So you may come into contact with a lot of different types of cultures, and it's important to know that each one of those families or each one of those individuals may be at a different point with their culture. And so it's really important to not make a generalization about what their culture is, what things may be helpful to them. There's a wide range of spiritual beliefs and practices and language, from being very traditional to not having any connection with your culture. So it's always just best to ask the patient and to really understand their background. Why is historical trauma different or important to us? Well, we've kind of talked about some of those things, but just understanding the patient's experience and view, and maybe understanding some of the patient's response and historical trauma can be all of these things that we've really talked about in the past, all the way up to what happened this morning, and experiencing multiple events of trauma. So the patient's responses of survivor guilt, depression, shame, the self-destructive behavior like substance abuse or alcohol abuse, having intense fears and low self-esteem. We can see where all of these things, and suicidal ideation or just dissociation and numbness would manifest with our visits with our patients. And this goes for all patients with multiple trauma events that have happened. I really like this resource, the TIP Series 57 on this. It's a very lengthy resource, but it really goes through some of the effects that trauma has had, and then some ways to work through those. Well, it's a behavioral health focused manual, but that's a really good resource to check out. I have it on the slide here. It takes much more time to go through it than I have time to talk about, but that would be a great resource for anybody looking into historical trauma or trauma-informed care in general. So what helps? These things have, and there's other studies that have actually looked at ACEs with children and Native American children, and they're kind of echoed through other literature that I've read as well. But strong kinship bonds. So anything that your program can do to encourage some of these things that are on the list is something that is obviously evidence-based and very helpful to your patients. That just the respect for elders and importance of extended family and strengthening family relationships, spirituality and religious practices, although many of our healthcare systems don't really acknowledge that. The Indian Health Service has really tried to put the possibility of seeking that type of spiritual and cultural healing and using that cultural wisdom back into some of our services, and especially our grant programs really encourage the use of cultural and spiritual practices if they can be woven into care. Value in friendships and warm personal relationships, and that comes from just acknowledging that family is important and maybe allowing that family presence if the patient wants that. Instilling just the history and the heritage and any historical traditions and acknowledging that and allowing that to be integrated into your services if it can be in some way. I know with there's different, I've worked on different service units or reservations, and a really nice part of our forensic exams in Pine Ridge, South Dakota was the smudging. We did allow them to light sage and sweetgrass and pray and then smudge after the forensic health services. So it's something little, but it was something that's very valuable and healing to right after the exam, and after you shower and then to be able to pray and smudge off and just incorporating that or giving them the opportunity to. There's many patients that didn't want to do that, or they wanted to, call, their other spiritual or access other spiritual practices, and that's fine too. But acknowledging that healing part of cultural and spiritual relationships is really important as well. And then just other things that make, to help with self-esteem, just the strong work ethic and having interests or helping them to achieve employment, a safe house, things like that. Obviously with all of our populations, not just Native American, American Indian, but that's important. And to be able to refer to those types of services within healthcare, because we always don't develop that or those types of relationships always, but that's really important, especially with our sexual assault survivors. Like they have to leave their home or leave their community altogether. That's often something that our patients struggle with, because if the crime or had to do with a relationship where they're out of a home, and then sometimes because of the family structures and the maybe fear, they will often leave their community, and so those types of things become very important: the employment and the housing and other support systems. So additional training for historical trauma, IHS does have several very good courses for non-healthcare providers, healthcare providers, supervisors, parents that can be accessed at this website. So, and they have different CEs and professional credits available on every one of these too. But it is a nice site. It's the IHS Teleeducation Center. So you can go to www.ihs.gov and just put it in the search section of that webpage, and you'll come to the trauma-informed care. There's webinars, and there's also live presentations that you have to get, you have to register for. Sorry. Let's see here. I think I may have skipped over one. Okay, here we go. Oops. So the current accessibility to forensic exams on tribal lands is something that we're really trying to expand within the Indian Health Service. So remember that some of the facilities are run by the Indian Health Service, some are run by tribal programs and urban programs. So the facilities that we directly administer services on are the ones that are policies. So when we're going to go over, or I'm going to show you where our policies are at, but those are where our policies pertain to. And some tribal sites may have adopted similar policies, but they're probably not going to be exactly the same. So when we're talking about that access, or that the different policies, or what services are available from location to location, that's partly why, because some are administered by IHS and some aren't. Whoops. Sorry. So in the IHS and the tribal systems, we are aware of about 35 forensic healthcare programs. And you might think, well, why aren't you aware of all of them? Because not all tribal, the tribes have taken their money from the federal government and allocated them themselves. They don't have any reporting requirements to the federal government after they make that agreement. So not all of them report to us, but we know of about 35 within the IHS and tribal systems. There's, of those 35, about 14 have pediatric forensic health care programs that provide exams. And then there is some fluctuation due to, and it's mostly the overturn in staffing of sexual assault nurse examiners, and then just reporting to IHS. So there might be more than this, but that haven't reported to IHS that they are running a service, or that a newly created service was enacted. So then there are other health clinics. So they're out of the ones that are available now are mostly associated with a facility that has an ER or has like a larger clinic. But there are other smaller clinics that have been doing forensic exams. Access by referral. So of the other Indian Health Service administered clinics, we have a national policy that all of our patients that come in and report a sexual assault, sexual abuse, IPV, intimate partner violence, they are in the window of needing an exam. We either have to provide that exam on site or by referral. So if they need an exam and it's not available at that site or in that community, we will transport that patient to an appropriate location to get either the adult, adolescent, or pediatric exam as appropriate. And then the other thing that with our national policy is that we found that transportation is a real barrier to accessing forensic health exams, and it can even affect whether a patient will actually pursue reporting. So we put into our agency policy that not only will we transport them there, we will also transport them back from that site. And that's in our Chapter 29 sexual assault policy. So I want to transfer to laws to be aware of. So there are many federal laws, and because of the different jurisdictions, so, there's sometimes also state laws that we have to be aware of, and tribal laws. So there's many tribes that have enacted local laws that apply to their tribal jurisdiction as well. So on the federal lands, historically there's been many laws, Major Crimes Act and things like that apply to federal lands. But one of the more recent ones was the Tribal Law and Order Act of 2010, and that was signed into law by President Obama, and it really expanded the reach of tribal courts across the nation. So in the past, tribal courts were only able to prosecute crimes for that involved an Indian, a native. So they had to have some kind of tribal either enrollment or connection to the tribe for the tribal court in the land wherever the crime was committed to actually have jurisdiction over that crime. So what happens is if the crime didn't reach the federal level of a major crime, and prior to this, then the tribal court couldn't prosecute it or deal with the issue. So it often went without any accountability at all. So this expanded their reach a little bit. And then it was kind of a precursor to the VAWA 2013, which definitely expanded a tribal court's reach if the tribal courts enacted some changes in order to prosecute non-native offenders. So it also, this 2010 law also did, let's say the federal government didn't pick up a sexual assault case. It did allow tribal courts to sentence. So if the tribe then wanted to prosecute a crime, it allowed them to increase a jail sentence handed down. Also, in prior to that, tribal courts often were only able to sentence somebody up to a year in their own county jail, and this opened up the possibility of using a federal prison or other means to give a longer sentence than was previously allowed. So another law to be aware of is Public Law 280, and us in the field, we know what this is. The Public Law 280 it was a law back in the 1950s, I believe 1953. It's here. It's right here, August 15th of 1953. It was a law that transferred legal authority or jurisdiction from the federal government to state governments, which really changed, and it was only in a few states. So it ended up to be 6 states, but 5 states initially: California, Minnesota, Nebraska, Oregon, and Wisconsin. And then Alaska also entered. It is a Public Law 280 state. So in those states, when a crime of sexual assault, sexual abuse, which is, a major crime under the Major Crimes Act, but and tribal law and order, that normally would be handled in a federal court by a federal prosecutor. And in these states, though, the jurisdiction is transferred to the state for those. So in those states that I mentioned, again, it's California, Minnesota, Nebraska, Oregon, Wisconsin, and Alaska. Those crimes will be then prosecuted in the state jurisdiction. So in those ones, your collection of the evidence in those states might go to the sheriff's department, or and you might be dealing with the state's attorney in that particular region for the prosecutions of those crimes. Where in other non-Public Law 280 states, you normally would be handing over that evidence to either the Bureau of an Investigation, a criminal investigator, a federal officer, or the FBI, or and dealing with advocates or the federal prosecutor. prosecutor's office would make a decision on prosecution of that case. So that's just a little bit of the, jurisdictional issues. And then if they decline, you might then, tribal locations are now having laws based on, intimate partner violence, human trafficking, sexual assaults, that they may take up and then prosecute for probably a lower sentence length of time, but they then do have the ability to prosecute that locally too. So I mentioned the Violence Against Women Act. I know that this audience is probably very versed on the Violence Against Women Act, but there's some special provisions in that law that, of course, is not in effect right now, but it expired February 15th, and we're waiting for it to be reauthorized for the VAWA 2019 bill. But back in 2000, so this law started in 1994, obviously, and there's been several reiterations, but in 2013, that was, 3 years after this Tribal Law and Order Act that expanded some of the courts. In Violence Against Women Act reauthorization of 2013, there was something called an expanded jurisdiction for tribal courts where they could, if they met some threshold guidelines, such as having, the lawyer, the judge, and the defense, or the prosecutor and the defense attorney and the judge had to be have like state licenses and be able to practice in other courts. And there was some other provisions that the tribal court had to meet in order to do this, but they could prosecute non-natives for domestic violence crimes. And so it was very limited in that they had to be some kind of a relationship prior to the crime happening. But it did, for the first time, open up really the possibility of prosecuting crimes of non-Indians that came onto Indian native land and committed crimes. So that was, a significant win for American Indian, Alaska Native communities to be able to acknowledge those crimes and actually have, if the feds didn't pick it up, they could prosecute. The bill right now, like I said, is in limbo. So, and some of those provisions may be weakened, or we really don't know what's going to happen with that. So we're watching that. But there are some very significant population-specific interventions that were put into that law in 2013. So just being aware of that is important. And then it also, and then tribal law, I just wanted to mention that Tribal Law and Order Act of 2010 also established tribal sex offender registries. So that's something also that is, when you go to a federal land, they usually have their own tribal sex offender registry, and the people on that registry may or may not be listed also in your state registry. So that's important, when you Google a certain tribe, or for victims to be knowledgeable of, is that they may have their own sex offender registry to be able to, be aware of different sex offenders and protect their families, children on those lands. So barriers to forensic healthcare access for American Indian Alaska Native. So, we talked about the general access issues. We have many reservations, tribal lands, populations in urban areas. And of course we have like or private sexual assault centers. But on tribal lands, if you're not in one of those locations of the 35, different programs, or if you have such a barrier to accessing healthcare in general because of lack of transportation or just the remoteness. That's one of the things I generally hear is just I just couldn't get there. I couldn't get there, or it had been so long, it had been several days, and I couldn't find a ride. So I ended up not reporting. That is a real concern for us, to be able to put resources toward the transportation issue, because it really does affect whether somebody reports or not. And that's important when you're planning services, is to try to acknowledge that or provide transportation in some way, whether that's through an advocacy program or providing bus tickets or taxis. And in these remote areas, there's obviously not usually Uber or anything like that, so it's very difficult sometimes. But that's one of the major barriers that we hear. Just poverty in general, and not having lack of access to private health insurance, especially for those that are living, and are the working poor and off reservation. They might not have that Indian Health Service to go to, and they may have healthcare bills that they've already ran up, and they're scared to go and possibly run up another bill. So those are real fears for our patients that might deter them from actually coming for forensic health care. And then racism, real and perceived. They're especially around border towns and accessing if they don't have a forensic exam center, maybe a hesitance to go off the reservation just because of things that they've experienced in their past, and may not even be with that healthcare system, but just in the communities in general, may discourage patients from receiving or even accessing healthcare in other systems. And then just mistrust in the justice system and ability to protect. There's a lot of gaps in jurisdictional issues where, especially if it's across jurisdictions with the perpetrator and the victim, the trust in protective orders from going from a federal or tribal court to being recognized in a state court, or vice versa. So that mistrust and fear that they won't be able to access the services when they need to if they do report is very real. And then just a general mistrust of the government. And that's, varies from tribe to tribe, but it's much different, in my tribe when, a lot of our population may have been adversely affected from the flu and or famine, which wiped out a significant part of my tribe, and, just 8 hours away in another tribe, their population in their history may have been from, being wiped out from a war with the government. So federal services aren't really, are still, and that is in the minds of different people. And, policies of our government, such as boarding schools and sterilization of, unconsented sterilizations of Native American women back in the 70s. Things like that really obviously live in our current memory and fuel that mistrust of the government. So we have to work really hard to connect with our patients, educate, answer all the questions that we can, and be transparent and upfront with what we can provide and what may not be provided. Also, the fear of privacy with our family relationships being as they are on federal lands. We may be very closely related to somebody that works in law enforcement, works in the emergency room, or just feels that the people working there that see them come in, see them, even if they don't see their health record, will know and possibly report to their perpetrator's family, the perpetrator themselves, or they just don't want their own family to know. So sometimes we see patients that will actually go to a private health system to get care. So they avoid that possible communication with their people that they know. And so that's something that if somebody does come to you and they're kind of out of their location, if you have to then turn that evidence over to the police department back on, where the crime happened, just being open about that do you want this information going back to them? Because this is who, the agency that we have to call, or this is a possibility of maybe this person knowing, and just talking about their fears or why they didn't report there, can really help in planning their interventions and having them control the access of that information and where it goes. And then, of course, just our limited access to forensic health professionals. We have a high turnover in SANE nurses, which I think all states have or have experienced. But we trained about 1,500 forensic healthcare providers, and of our active within the Indian Health Service tribal system, I think maybe 10% of those are active within our system. And we may have trained others that go out and work for private systems and referral centers that I don't know about. But it is a high turnover, and we do put a lot of resources into this. And then staff may feel, just like in any, same program, that, oh, I don't want to do this, or yeah, this is something different than I thought. So we really struggle with that, and we always encourage any trained professionals to come and consider the Indian Health Service or tribal programs. So recommendations, just to revise patient resources and education to include ITU resources and contact information. There's even, I did a presentation to some Maine sexual assault nurses, and just when I Googled, they had a couple of awesome tribal programs that provided transportation, provided victim advocacy, and through the tribal courts, and had a lot of services. And so just to know that those services, and search for those services within your state or reservation communities, and offer those to patients and offer those referral connections. American Indian, Alaskan Native appropriate education materials. We'll go over in the resources some very easily orderable posters, brochures, palm cards that feature American Indian, Alaskan Native groups in them. And then just becoming familiar with regional, indigenous, cultural, religious practices and history helps. Not, your patient might not be from that region, but it does help and shows cultural sensitivity, and just being able to talk to your patient about that, those practices. And of course, don't be afraid to ask, because every one of them is different. There's so many different tribes, it's impossible to know everything. So just asking your patient about their social history and situation, and their cultural backgrounds. Just don't be afraid to ask. Ask them, if there's something that you can do that would be comforting, or and in your referral services, maybe reach out to cultural leaders in the community or in that you could access to give those services or that information if possible. So I just wanted to also just hit on a couple of our chapters, and these policies can be adapted to other sites, but these policies actually are in effect for all the Indian Health administered facilities. So I just wanted to quickly, sorry, let me see here. Go to our parts and chapters. And if you go to www.ihs.gov and you put in Indian Health Manual, you'll come to our parts and chapters. And then if you scroll down, you can actually go to our sexual assault chapter, which is based on national guidelines that we help develop, but it really does line out, what the sexual assault examiner, things that they're responsible for. So we do need to offer emergency contraception. We do need to offer HIV and sexually transmitted infection prophylaxis. We do need to participate in the coordinated community response. If there is one available in that community, IHS should be, or somebody from the staff should be participating in that. There's a lot of different provisions in here, like our storage of our evidence. We don't actually store evidence, or we, only temporarily at our facility. The proper storage of the evidence is with law enforcement. And so that's something that we've had to work out with BIA, law enforcement, and FBI and tribal jurisdictions. The patient-centered care is all based on national guidelines. So ours aligns with national guidelines. The reporting, we can have an unreported sexual assault evidence collection in collaboration with the BIA or tribal police, or in those public law 280 states, the sheriff's departments on state jurisdiction. We do go over suspect exams and the competencies training for examiners in there. And then we also have a couple of new or more recent chapters, sorry. So we also do this very similar to that chapter under intimate partner violence and intimate partner violence exams, the screenings and the interventions that we should offer. And then our newest chapter is child maltreatment, and that goes over all forms of child maltreatment, some of the care that should be given, and also the qualifications of the examiner. And the services that should follow for that. And so all of those chapters can be found in the Indian Health Manual on our site. Another one that we just updated was protecting children from sexual abuse by healthcare providers. And that was in response to some of the risk and the horrible events that have taken place with some of our staff and patients that have been abused. And that's an important chapter. If you ever get a patient that reports being abused by a staff member at any one of the Indian Health Service, the urbans, or the tribal facilities, there is a number that you can call. And of course, it should be reported to law enforcement right away. But there's a number to call to report it to the Indian Health Service as well within this chapter. And we will take action and follow up on that. So I just wanted to, we'll switch back to this. So another resource that I'm really proud of that was developed back in 2012 was this contract between IHS and the National or International Association of Forensic Nurses. It's a wonderful resource, and when you're serving American Indian and Alaska Native populations, it's really nice to take courses that are geared towards that population or have that victim's voice presence in the training. And I'm really proud of a lot of the work that has been developed, or the products that have been developed through this contract, as all of our courses do have patients or people from this population interwoven into the courses. So, and these courses that are available on this website are free to anybody that are serve tribal communities or tribal patients, Native American, Alaska Native patients. So if you go to www.tribalforensichealthcare.org, you can find our online courses, our live trainings. We have a webinar every quarter that we give. And we also offer hands-on clinical training. So there's a 3-day clinical experience for adult adolescent exams, and then, a 2-day for the adult adolescent clinical training and a 3-day pediatric adolescent clinical training at one of our 3 sites that is a high volume for a pediatric forensic center. So staff sexual assault examiners are eligible to go to one of these experiences if you're serving Native populations and go through an actual exam. Some of them are on, the adult adolescents are on live models, but the clinical training is some of the best that I've ever seen. And then the pediatric and adolescent clinical training is at a high volume center. So you'll be mentored by an experienced nurse and work with actual patients in those centers. So it's a really good experience to solidify, didactic training or just brush up and refresh skills. So all of that is available on the Tribal Forensic Healthcare website, as well as I think there's 54, 55 past webinars that are archived that many of them still have the CEUs available for them. And yeah, and if you get on my listserv, which we'll go over, I always send out notices of those. Okay, and I know I'm getting down to time here, so I just want to quickly go through. I just want to, just touch on the SOAR for healthcare and wellness, and the SOAR is a human trafficking awareness and courses that are offered through the Health and Human Services, ACF, and OTIP. And so they just released SOAR for Native communities, an awesome course, and it's geared towards healthcare providers that work with Indigenous populations, goes over the SOAR system of responding to human trafficking, and that stop, observe, ask, and respond. And awesome course. I encourage anybody that is working with Native communities to take that course. It's about an hour and a half. If you click through all the links, I think it took me like an hour, 45 minutes, but I clicked through everything that was available. So I was a little bit longer. And then this is my forensic healthcare listserv. So I put out information about grants, training opportunities, in there, and you can actually just go to our website, www.ihs.gov, and type in forensic listserv, and you'll come to this. And you can just click on it and sign up, and that comes to me, and I can approve it. And then the Strong Hearts Native Helpline, I really like this resource because the people that you call into the referral, the people who answer the telephone on the other end of this line are really familiar with tribal programs and tribal communities. So I really like that. They have extended their hours recently, but they're not a 24/7 service. In the off hours, it goes to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And then we do fund, the Indian Health Service does fund domestic violence prevention program projects, which covers sexual assault, sexual abuse, and domestic violence and elder abuse. And so right now we, annually give a little bit over 11 million for those projects. They're currently on their last 5-year or 3-year cycle. So the notice of funding opportunities, the NOFOs as we call them, will be available this summer for the next application period, and that'll be a 5-year period from 2020 to 2025. And the range of funding is like anywhere from 50,000 to a little bit over 210,000 the last time. I don't know what will be available, of course, this time, but some programs did get 210,000 annually to enhance or create a sexual assault forensic exam center or an advocacy program. So patient education resources that are American Indian, Alaska Native specific, great ones from Futures Without Violence. If you go to their website, they have multiple palm cards, posters. You can order the hard copy for nominal fee, I think just for shipping, or you can download some of those things and just print them off yourself. Mending the Sacred Hoop is also an excellent resource for education and brochures. I really like their brochures and the things that they've created, and those are all downloadable, so you can just print them off. And then I just wanted to mention the Blue Campaign through the Department of Homeland Security. They do actually have an American Indian Alaska Native specific poster series for human trafficking that is really nice. And questions. So my name is Erica Gorno. I give technical assistance, answer questions, help write policies. Anything that I can do for you, please give me a call or email me at erica.gorno@ihs.gov.
All right. Thank you so much, Erica. Just a couple of quick announcements before we get into questions. So we will unfortunately not have a PDF version of today's slides, but we are recording today's event, and we should have that turned around into our archival version probably by the beginning of next week, which means you will be able to, again, just log back in and get into today's live recording and access and reference back to any of the references and resource materials that Erica compiled into her presentation. So the first question that came in was from Carol. She's asking if she's actually wondering if any of these resources would be fairly applicable to Canadian First Nation populations. Obviously, some of the programs, since they are up in Canada, would not be sufficient, but she was wondering if they would be fairly applicable.
Depending, of course, on, so like the IHS, the grant program is only available for facilities and things out in the United States, but we have had people from Canada serving First Nations groups take our training, and the like the IFIN, the certificate for the CEUs for our sexual assault courses and webinars and things like that are recognized up in Canada. But then all the brochures, though, are those are, I don't think it has any reference to like the U.S. except for maybe the human trafficking, the Blue Campaign. But those brochures or patient education would certainly be applicable in those communities and would be nice for them to use. Some of the tribal services, I'm thinking, near the border will probably still be accessible if, that population is historically, crosses the border a lot to access services. I'm not sure if there was a specific type of thing that was being requested or applicability to Canadian First Nations.
She actually wrote back in and said that she was really focusing on the care for them. The laws and the healthcare system is different in Canada, so she was really focusing on the care.
Well, that SAMHSA document, I think, would apply, and just because it's very general about trauma. People that have experienced historical trauma and multiple traumatic events and things that are recommended for care with them. I think that is applicable across many populations, including other Indigenous populations on our continent. The human trafficking education definitely probably would apply. And some of the things that are discussed in those are probably shared among those populations. But I can't, there's many tribes in Canada too. So I don't have, specifics. Yeah, I'd have to know more, I guess, about the population served, but we have many tribes that, near the border, Sioux and, the Algonquian tribes that have relatives that actually live, are related, from the United States to the Canadians. So I would gather that there was a lot of similarities.
All right. I've got a two-part question. So since the beginning of your career, what do you see as the biggest hurdle that you still have to overcome in your field within the Native American community? And then on the other side of the spectrum, where do you feel the biggest step in the right direction has occurred within the Indian Health Services?
So in my career, and I think it's still to over, and I don't know if that's because in tribal systems, it's very likely that the staff that staff those systems are also might be Native American, and maybe our own personal trauma as sexual assault examiners, when we look at the things that we've been through, make it even harder to then stay in this role in a long period of time or over time. I don't know if that's affects the turnover or just the experiencing of trauma of our patients and having that being too much. We do have a high turnover within the Indian Health Service as a whole. So I think that is the biggest barrier, is just the staff programs. Like when I started out, I was a GS7 IHS nurse in the emergency room, and there was nobody to do sexual assault exams. And so I just went to the training, and for 2 years, I was the only one that did all the exams on our reservation. So that gets really, heavy for people. So us just trying to support staffing is like our biggest hurdle, and trying to, like I said, I went through, we trained so many people, but only, a very small portion of those actually stay and perform the exams. So coming up with, I think the biggest step that we have to look at is elevating the sexual assault nurse examiner profession, or the first forensic examiner if they're other fields, or like a PA or FNP, and having actual pay or role, like a nurse, they would hire a sexual assault nurse, and that would be their title, and they would have a pay grade that's commensurate with the GS11 or whatever. And really recognizing that within the federal system as a standalone position, and funding that, I think those kind of supports are going to make the biggest impact in stability of our programs.
All right. Thank you for that. So this one's a question from me, because it's something that I've noticed in other webinars on special populations in the Native American communities. We've heard presenters say one of the biggest obstacles has really been the communication between Native tribes and law enforcement or sexual assault advocates. What are some things that you've found to help bridge that gap?
Really, those community, either developing a community response team or just an MDT team, and ensuring, or even inviting yourself as a healthcare provider to those teams. So there was, I think of one of the more successful communities that I know of on tribal land. And, when the forensic program developed, lo and behold, they had a community response for sexual assault and sexual abuse. Healthcare had never been invited to it. So the sexual assault nurse invited herself, and since then they've had a fairly good communication. And I was actually a sexual assault nurse then, later in the same program, but the relationship was so good that I could call the prosecutor, the tribal prosecutor, if I thought that my patient wasn't being given the services, like in the middle of the night. I mean, it was very good. So just participation on those community response teams, or creating those. And then also, if you're dealing with Indian children, the thing that, like, case management of forensic patients is a must. because we have so many ways that our patients can fall through the cracks. So especially our pediatric patients, if they're placed in foster care in other communities or other states, we kind of lose them to knowing whether these kids ever got follow-up, if they were prosecuted, and we don't ever really know. And then they might come back to our communities and those healthcare records are somewhere else, so we don't know what happened. And sometimes in the foster care system, we might get a foster child into, that comes into healthcare, and we have no idea that there's this very significant traumatic event that we need to provide follow-up for this child and get counseling and maybe follow-up for testing done for the child. So making sure that also you reach out to the counties around the tribal location, because they may have a significant population that they're too meeting a wall when it comes to the jurisdictional issues, and those children are eventually either going to be served by your healthcare program either now, or you're going to have to transfer them out. So it's keeping those participation and making sure that somebody in your organization is accountable to going to those meetings and bringing that information back and then doing something about it, extending referrals, calling the patient and, seeing if they want those services, things like that. And in also having your forensic healthcare program have some kind of a quality review to make sure that that case management is happening and that patients aren't slipping through the cracks.
All right. Thank you so much for that. That was the last question that had come in, and we are at the end of our time, so we are going to go ahead and end our webinar for today. Obviously, the first thing we would like to do is thank Ms. Erica Gorno for her time, as well as everything that she is doing within her organization and within her community. So Erica, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present.
We are going to leave Erica's information up on the screen throughout the next couple of minutes, just so that you do have a chance to take down her email address as well as her direct contact phone number. Again, we are recording today's event, so you will be able to access that, I would say, the beginning of next week. That way you can refer back to any of the resources that were found throughout. And then also in the chat, you will find a few links, including her listserv that were posted, so you can access those immediately. Again, obviously, we would like to thank our subject matter expert for her presentation today, but we would also like to take this time to thank all of our attendees for joining us. These webinars are just simply not possible without your attendance and support, so thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. Before you leave, we always do ask that you participate in the short survey. You'll find the word survey directly below and to the right of the closed captions. So before you leave, you can simply click the survey button and it will take you directly to our survey, where your feedback is always vital information that we try to use to make sure that you are receiving the best webinar experience possible, as well as adjust any of the content and the way we disseminate that information out to you, our audience. So if you could take a few moments to complete that survey, we would definitely appreciate it. You will see in the chat pod, Tyler will be posting links to our social media outlets, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. So make sure you are following us there, as well as links to our website, where you can find all of our no-cost offerings, including webinars, podcasts, special success stories, and reports. And then there will be a link for our podcasts on there as well. Again, thank you so much, Erica, for your presentation today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon.